Journalists, on the other hand, shouldn't have what you called a glass jaw when it comes to some of these investigations, citing the First Amendment and threats to the First Amendment.
There is a particular kind of authority that only comes with age. Not the brittle, defensive authority of someone clinging to relevance, but the deep, settled authority of a man who has seen enough of the world to know what actually matters. Tom Brokaw, at 86 years old, carries that kind of authority. He spent decades as one of the most recognized voices in American journalism, a man who sat behind the anchor desk at NBC Nightly News and delivered the day's events to tens of millions of households with a calm and gravity that felt almost sacred. He covered wars, presidential scandals, the collapse of the Soviet Empire, and the birth of a new millennium. He was, by any reasonable measure, one of the last true giants of broadcast journalism. So when a man like Tom Brokaw decides to speak up about someone, when he decides to offer his genuine, unfiltered assessment of a colleague, people in the industry listen. And lately, the name on Tom Brokaw's lips has been Savannah Guthrie. This is not a story about rivalry. It is not a story about generational conflict or old guard resentment. This is something rarer and more interesting than that. This is a story about one legend recognizing another, across a chasm of time and circumstance, and extending something that does not come easily to people at the top of any profession: genuine, wholehearted respect. To understand why Brokaw's words carry the weight they do, you have to understand where he came from and what he built. Tom Brokaw did not grow up with any particular advantage. He was raised in South Dakota, in the kind of small-town America that is more concerned with hard winters and honest work than with fame or prestige. But from an early age, he had something that cannot be taught in any journalism school: an instinct for the story. He understood, almost intuitively, that news was not just information. It was narrative. It was the ongoing human drama of a civilization trying to understand itself. He worked his way up through local television stations, learning the craft the hard way, making mistakes in front of small audiences before eventually earning his place on the national stage. By the time he arrived at NBC in the 1970s, he was already a seasoned reporter with a reputation for thoroughness and composure. He covered the White House. He covered civil unrest. He covered the kinds of stories that make younger journalists question whether they chose the right profession. And through all of it, he remained steady. He remained trustworthy. That steadiness became his signature, the thing that audiences came to rely on the way you rely on a sturdy wall in a shaking building. His years anchoring NBC Nightly News, which he took over in 1983, cemented his place in American cultural history. He was part of what became known as the Big Three, alongside Peter Jennings at ABC and Dan Rather at CBS. These three men were not just news anchors in the modern, fragmented sense of the term. They were institutions. They were the people that America turned to when something happened. Something real, something frightening, something world-altering. When the Berlin Wall came down in November of 1989, Tom Brokaw was there, reporting from the ground with a kind of controlled excitement that managed to be both professional and deeply human. It remains one of the most memorable moments in the history of television journalism. But Brokaw was never just a talking head. He was a reporter at his core, and reporters are students of character. They study people for a living. They learn to read the room, to sense authenticity, to distinguish between someone performing competence and someone genuinely possessing it. That skill does not retire when the anchor desk is vacated. It sharpens with age. And it is that skill, honed over 6 decades, that Brokaw has been quietly applying to the woman who now occupies the most prominent seat in morning television. Savannah Guthrie came to journalism by an unusual route. She was a lawyer first, not just a law school graduate who decided the courtroom was not for her, but a working litigator who understood evidence, argumentation, and the art of dismantling a narrative that does not hold up to scrutiny. She earned her law degree from Georgetown University Law Center and practiced law in Arizona before her career took its pivot toward media. That legal background is not incidental to who she is as a journalist. It is the foundation of everything. When Guthrie joined NBC News in 2008, she brought with her a way of thinking that was different from most of her peers. Lawyers are trained to find the weakness in an argument, to anticipate counterarguments, to listen not just for what someone is saying but for what they are carefully avoiding. Those are extraordinary skills in an interview setting. A good journalist asks questions. A great journalist listens to the answers and then asks the question the subject was hoping would never come. Savannah Guthrie does that routinely, and she does it with a smile that makes the whole process feel almost friendly until the moment it very much is not. She served as a White House correspondent for NBC News, a role that requires both encyclopedic knowledge and the ability to perform under relentless pressure. The White House briefing room is not a gentle environment. It is competitive, fast-moving, and unforgiving of preparation failures. Guthrie thrived in it. She developed a reputation among colleagues as someone who was always the most prepared person in the room, not because she was trying to outshine anyone, but because that is simply how she approaches her work. In 2012, she joined the Today Show as a co-anchor alongside Matt Lauer and Curry. The transition was not without turbulence. The Today Show is an institution unto itself, with a culture and an audience dynamic that takes time to understand. But Guthrie navigated it with characteristic steadiness. She found her footing, found her voice, and began building the particular kind of relationship with the audience that morning television requires above all others: trust. Morning television is a strange and demanding art form that is often not taken seriously by people who have never tried to produce 3 hours of live, unscripted television every single weekday. The people who anchor morning shows are not simply reading from a teleprompter. They are managing a constantly shifting environment that includes breaking news, celebrity interviews, cooking segments, human interest stories, political analysis, and the occasional live performance, all while projecting warmth, competence, and energy to an audience that is, by definition, not yet fully awake. It is an extraordinary professional challenge, and very few people are genuinely good at it. Savannah Guthrie is genuinely good at it. That much is beyond dispute. But the real test of her character came not during the ordinary mornings, but during the extraordinary ones. And the most extraordinary morning of her professional life came in November of 2017, when NBC News announced that Matt Lauer had been terminated following allegations of sexual misconduct in the workplace. Matt Lauer had been the face of the Today Show for more than 2 decades. He was, for an entire generation of American viewers, as familiar as a family member, as reliable as a morning cup of coffee. His departure was not just a personnel change. It was a seismic event that sent shockwaves through the building at 30 Rockefeller Plaza and through the broader culture of television journalism. The question hanging over the Today Show in those immediate aftermath hours was whether the program could survive such a foundational disruption. Savannah Guthrie's response to that moment was, by any measure, remarkable. She did not hide behind carefully crafted corporate language. She did not project a false composure that would have felt insulting to the gravity of the situation. Instead, she sat at the anchor desk and spoke honestly about what she was feeling. The shock, the sadness, the complex and painful process of confronting difficult truths about someone she had worked alongside for years. She acknowledged the pain of the women who had come forward. She was transparent about her own confusion and grief. And she did all of this live, on national television, without a script that could have made it easier. It was, in the estimation of many who have followed her career, the moment that defined Savannah Guthrie's legacy, not just as a morning host, but as a journalist and as a person. She demonstrated that the most powerful thing a figure in her position could offer was not invulnerability but authenticity. She proved that being honest about uncertainty is not weakness. It is, in fact, the most credible thing a journalist can do. Tom Brokaw, who spent his career navigating the expectation that anchors should project an almost otherworldly calm regardless of what was actually happening, watched all of this unfold from his remove in Montana and recognized something important. He recognized that Savannah Guthrie had done something in that moment that very few people in his own generation would have known how to do. She had stayed human under the most intense professional pressure. She had told the truth about how she felt, and in doing so, had deepened rather than diminished her authority with the audience. There is something that Brokaw has said, in various forms and in various contexts over the years, about the quality that separates truly great journalists from merely excellent ones. He has talked about the importance of curiosity, genuine, insatiable curiosity about people and events and the forces that connect them. He has talked about the discipline of separating what you know from what you believe. And he has talked about the courage required to report the truth when the truth is inconvenient for people who would prefer silence. When he looks at Savannah Guthrie, he sees all of that. He sees a journalist who does the work, who prepares meticulously, who takes the responsibility of the seat she occupies seriously in a way that honors the history of the institution she represents. He sees someone who interviews world leaders with the same rigor she brings to lighter segments, who does not condescend to the audience regardless of the subject matter, and who maintains her professional standards in an environment that has become increasingly hostile to serious journalism. But there is something else Brokaw sees, something that perhaps only someone of his age and experience is positioned to fully appreciate. He sees the cost. He sees what it takes, physically and emotionally and personally, to do what Savannah Guthrie does every single day. Because Tom Brokaw paid a version of that cost himself, across decades, and he knows what it looks like on a person's face. Brokaw was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a form of blood cancer, in 2013. He announced his diagnosis publicly in early 2014, and his honesty about the experience, the fear, the treatment, the uncertainty, was consistent with the character he had shown throughout his career. He did not pretend it was not happening. He wrote about it. He talked about it. He became, in a different way than he had intended when he was anchoring the nightly news, a voice for people confronting their own mortality and illness. He continued writing, continued making public appearances, continued engaging with a profession he loved, even as his body was fighting a battle of its own. That experience changed how Brokaw sees things. It tends to. People who have faced serious illness often report that it fundamentally reorganizes their priorities, strips away the superficial, and leaves only what is genuinely important. For Brokaw, one of the things that remained was his deep respect for the craft of journalism and for the people who practice it with integrity. And among those people, Savannah Guthrie stands out to him with particular clarity. Guthrie has had her own confrontations with physical vulnerability. In 2017, she suffered a serious eye injury when her young son accidentally hit her in the face with a toy train, damaging her retina and requiring multiple surgeries. 4 weeks, she had to rest her eye in near total darkness. The possibility that the injury could permanently affect her vision was very real. For a person whose career depends on her presence in front of cameras and her ability to read, process, and respond to information in real time, the prospect must have been terrifying. She came back. She came back wearing glasses, which she had never worn on air before, and she addressed the injury openly with her audience. She did not minimize it or rush past it. She let people see that it had been frightening, that the recovery had been difficult, and that she was grateful to be back. Once again, she chose transparency over the polished image of invulnerability that lesser professionals might have preferred. This is the pattern of Savannah Guthrie's career. The consistent choice to be a real person in a role that historically rewarded people for appearing to be something more than human. It is a counterintuitive strategy in a profession built on image, and it works precisely because it is genuine. Audiences are extraordinarily good at detecting when someone is performing sincerity versus actually possessing it. Guthrie actually possesses it, and that is not a small thing. Brokaw recognizes this because sincerity, actual uncontrived sincerity, was always the most valuable currency in journalism, even when the conventions of the profession made it harder to express. The anchors of his generation were trained to project a certain kind of composure that sometimes sat in tension with genuine human feeling. The goal was trustworthiness, and trustworthiness was associated with steadiness rather than vulnerability. What Savannah Guthrie has demonstrated, and what Brokaw has come to appreciate with the clarity that age and illness provide, is that the two things are not actually in conflict. Vulnerability, honestly expressed, is its own form of trustworthiness. Perhaps the deepest form. The world in which Savannah Guthrie does her work is almost unrecognizable compared to the world in which Tom Brokaw built his career. When Brokaw was anchoring NBC Nightly News, the news ecosystem was relatively simple. There were three major broadcast networks. There was CNN, which launched in 1980 and initially faced widespread skepticism about whether a 24-hour news network was even a viable concept. There were newspapers and news magazines. And there was the understanding, broadly shared across the culture, that the evening news anchor was a figure of genuine authority whose words carried weight. None of that is true anymore. The media landscape today is almost incomprehensibly fragmented. News comes from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Social media platforms have created an environment in which rumor and fact travel at the same speed and are often indistinguishable to a significant portion of the audience. The very concept of a shared reality, of a moment when the country gathers around the same source to receive the same information, has largely dissolved. Every individual can now curate their own information environment, which means that every journalist, every anchor, every media figure is competing not just against other professionals but against algorithms and influencers and the entire infinite scroll of the internet. To survive in that environment, let alone to thrive in it, requires a different set of skills than the ones that made Tom Brokaw great. It requires the ability to be genuinely engaging across multiple formats and contexts. It requires a kind of personal warmth that functions as a beacon in a chaotic information environment. Something that makes people choose to pay attention to you specifically when there are 10,000 other things competing for their attention. It requires the willingness to be known, not just as a professional persona but as an actual human being with actual experiences and actual feelings. Savannah Guthrie has all of that. She has been open about her journey to motherhood, which involved IVF and the particular kind of hope and anxiety that comes with building a family through medical intervention later in life. She has talked about the challenge of balancing an enormously demanding career with the daily, concrete reality of raising children. She has let the audience see her tired, see her moved, see her genuinely uncertain. She has made the Today Show feel, at its best, like a conversation between friends rather than a broadcast from on high. This is what Brokaw means when he speaks about Savannah Guthrie with admiration. He is not simply complimenting her professional competence, though that competence is real and substantial. He is recognizing that she has solved a problem that his generation never quite had to face: how to maintain genuine journalistic authority in an environment that demands constant intimacy. How to be trusted as a reporter of facts while also being liked as a person. How to hold the line on standards while holding the hand of an audience that is perpetually overwhelmed. The conversation about Savannah Guthrie that Brokaw has been having, not in press releases, not in formal interviews, but in the quiet, considered way that men of his age and disposition tend to communicate their real views, is ultimately a conversation about what journalism is for and what it requires of the people who practice it. Journalism, at its most fundamental, is a service profession. It exists to give people the information they need to make sense of their world and their lives. That has not changed. What has changed is the environment in which that service is delivered, and the qualities required of the people delivering it. The journalism of Brokaw's era rewarded a certain kind of distance and authority. The journalism of Guthrie's era rewards connection and authenticity. Neither is superior in an absolute sense. Both serve the underlying purpose of the profession, but they require different human beings. Tom Brokaw was exactly the right person for the journalism of his era, and Savannah Guthrie, in Brokaw's considered estimation, is exactly the right person for the journalism of hers. That is the highest compliment he knows how to pay. He is not saying she is better than the journalists who came before her. He is saying she is doing something genuinely difficult with genuine skill, and that the difficulty of her task deserves acknowledgement rather than condescension. There is a generosity in that view that speaks well of Brokaw himself. It would be easy, and not uncommon, for a figure of his stature and generation to look at contemporary morning television and find it wanting. To see the lifestyle segments and the social media engagement and the emotional openness and dismiss it as a departure from serious journalism. Some of his peers have made exactly that argument. Brokaw has not. Instead, he has looked clearly at what Savannah Guthrie is actually doing, assessed it honestly against the standards that genuinely matter, and concluded that it is impressive. At 86, Tom Brokaw has earned the right to say exactly what he thinks. He has covered enough history, endured enough difficulty, and outlasted enough trends to have a perspective that is worth something. His career spanned the golden age of broadcast journalism, the rise of the 24-hour news cycle, the arrival of the internet, and the complete transformation of the media landscape that has accelerated in the years since his retirement from the anchor desk in 2004. He has watched the industry he loved evolve into something he could not have entirely anticipated, and he has processed that evolution with the same honest intelligence he brought to his reporting. What he sees, when he looks at the current state of the Today Show and at the woman who anchors it, is not decline. It is adaptation. It is journalism finding new forms adequate to new circumstances, carried forward by someone with the skills and the character to do it justice. He sees Savannah Guthrie holding the line on things that matter: accuracy, accountability, genuine curiosity, respect for the audience, while adapting everything else to the demands of a radically changed environment. That is not nothing. In fact, it is everything. The details change. The platform changes. The format changes. But the commitment to telling the truth, to being honest with the audience, to taking the responsibility of a trusted public voice seriously, those things do not change. And when Brokaw looks at Guthrie, he sees those unchanging things, the things that made journalism matter when he was doing it, being carried forward into a world he does not always recognize. He is an 86-year-old man who has seen the Berlin Wall fall, who has reported from war zones and press rooms and presidential palaces, who has faced cancer and aging and the particular grief of outliving the era that made you. And he has looked at Savannah Guthrie, at everything she has done and everything she has endured and everything she continues to do every morning when she sits down at that desk, and he has decided she deserves to be recognized. From a man like Tom Brokaw, that recognition means something. It means something because he does not give it easily or carelessly. It means something because he has seen enough bad journalism and enough mediocre people in important positions to know the difference. And it means something because at 86, with the clarity that comes from a life fully and honestly lived, he has no reason left to say anything other than exactly what he believes. What he believes is that Savannah Guthrie is the real thing, a genuine journalist, a trustworthy anchor, a person who has earned her seat not because of luck or timing or a willingness to play the game, but because she is genuinely, substantively excellent